Hello everyone, Jared here, and in today's video I'm going to be putting together my brother's new PC. So let's get started. And here they are, all the pieces that I'll be using today in the build, starting with, of course, the most important piece, the case, which in this instance happens to be a Phanteks Enthoo Pro 2. It has 4 USB 3.0 Type A ports, as well as one Type C port in the front, allowing for the connection of several devices. The power button is located on the top of the case, followed by a top which is unfortunately not detachable, and it comes with room for up to 4 120mm fans on the side. When the case first arrived, I decided that I would go ahead and remove the optional SSD holders that covered up those fan spots previously, since that would allow for a lot more airflow to come into this case. But one thing I realized right away was that there was not much space up at the top between where the radiator would be going, as well as the cables that would be connected to the motherboard. So I knew right away that that would probably end up being the most irritating part of this build. Thankfully, however, it was clear that it would be easy enough to route things in a way such that you wouldn't be able to see any of the cables making a mess of things inside the case. In addition to the case, the Enthoo Pro 2 also came with its own accessory kit, which includes instructions on how to place the various parts inside the PC, as well as switchable panels for the back. Additionally, there are also some storage devices for hard drives, but what I was interested in here was the toolkit, with all the extra screws I'd be needing for this build. And so, it was time to go ahead and get started. Once the motherboard was finished, it was time to move on to what would end up being the most frustrating part of the build: the radiator, which needed to be attached to the motherboard inside the case. It was easy enough to install the fans onto the radiator outside the case, but making sure that all the wires went where they needed to go inside was going to be another issue entirely. Now, as you might be able to see, there's really not much space between it and the top of the case, which meant there wasn't much room for where I could place the radiator up top. Additionally, I forgot that I would need to place certain cables through the tiny slot that was provided at the top in the corner. So I quickly took out the power supply and stuck the power cables through the tiny hole into the motherboard, as well as installed the radiator up top once I'd done that. However, I quickly realized that I'd made a mistake in that I didn't connect wires from the radiator's fans to the motherboard. So I had to take it down and reinstall it once I'd connected those cables properly. And I had to do it once again after I thought I'd finished installing the radiator properly, because I realized too late that I also needed to connect my rear fan for the case up through that tiny hole as well. So after taking about another half hour to an hour, taking everything down and putting it back up again, correctly this time, everything was in its proper place, and I could finally move on to installing the rest of the fans. Additionally, I was adding this Streamer L-Connect 3 controller as a little gift I bought myself for my brother's computer to just make it a little bit more colorful. That, combined with all of these Lian Li Unifans and their respective controllers, meant that it was going to end up being quite a lot of fans inside this case. In total, there ended up being 11 fans and 3 controllers on the back, which altogether made the back of the case look like quite the mess. But from the front, it was still looking good. All the wires were routed properly through the back so that nothing would really be visible from the front, but this is where things started to get a little bit messy with cable management, because I had to use this NZXT USB hub since the motherboard didn't come with enough USB ports to support the front USB connectors as well as additional controllers for the fans. Unfortunately, this also meant that I needed to downgrade 2 of the front 3.0 USB connectors into USB 2.0s, but at least they still worked fine. Here's what the back of the case looked like before I did any cable management and hooked all the power cables in. As you can see, it really needed some organizing. And once I was done with that, it was time to install the most expensive piece of the computer, the graphics card, an RTX 3080 from MSI. Thankfully, the graphics card is pretty easy to install, and all you need to do is connect the power supply to the front. And in the end, this is what the build looked like right before I finished doing some more cable management in the back and tried to turn it on for the first time. This is where the troubles actually started to begin with the build, because the first thing I noticed was that some of the fans weren't turning on. But I read online that this could be a common occurrence with some Lian Li products because I hadn't installed the software related to them yet. However, a more pressing issue was the fact that I was getting a black screen after removing the CMOS battery from the motherboard after trying to troubleshoot it to get everything working. I ended up having to spend the next day and a half or so looking up what was wrong, why things weren't operating properly, and in the end, I realized all I had to do was just plug the HDMI cable into the motherboard rather than the graphics card, and I could access the BIOS from there. And once Windows was finally installed on the PC, I was able to make sure all the drivers were installed and everything was up to date. Then I downloaded the software for the Lian Li fans, and this was the final product. I have to say, although it was frustrating at times, it was a pretty fun build. And here it is, my brother's new computer. Thank you again for watching this video. If you liked it, please click the subscribe button down below and give the video a thumbs up. Also, please share this video as well as others from my channel to help this channel grow.